Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Mayday Masterclass. Really looking forward to taking you through the product in a little bit more detail. Obviously, this is a session that's designed for existing Mayday users, but we know and appreciate that everyone on Mayday is using it differently, using different parts of the product, and even within the parts of the product that you are using and are maximizing, there's often new features, advanced functionality that you might not have yet discovered. So we want to take this time to talk to that and show you how it all works. I suppose as a broader overview as to why we're running these sessions, because we do want to do this not just today, but moving forward indefinitely. We find too often that software companies speak to people, get them signed up, and get them using their products, and then just forget about them as though, hey, the job's done, we've got them on board. And from my perspective, that's just not the way that business should be done. Number one, our loyal customers are our biggest assets. So we want to make sure that you remain engaged and remain lovers of the product. And I think a big part of that is ensuring that you're aware of what else you can do with it. Too often people sign up for apps, they pay every month, but then they only use 20, 30% of the functionality, and they're not actually maximizing the return on that investment. So this session is all about helping you to get greater ROI on the money that you're spending with Mayday, and showing you what can be possible, even if you haven't got it fully up and running yet. So what I'll do is, because we are all familiar with Mayday, we're all Mayday users, I won't bother so much with a general overview of the product. I'll jump straight into each of the features one by one and go a little bit deeper on some of that functionality. So I'm in Balancer here, but I actually want to jump over to Recharger. Now, before I even go in there, if you're not seeing any of the products, it's just because under settings, when you first signed up for Mayday, you may not have enabled everything. So feel free at any point in time to come into the product section, enable the relevant products you want to use or try, and you can give them a go. But once you've got them all enabled, if you go over to Recharger here and jump into rules, obviously here there's been a fair bit of work. So even if you're a Recharge user, you'll notice there's been some new functionality over the past few weeks and months. So Recharger at a high level is all about recharging costs and revenues within the group. So any expense or revenue that's hitting one zero file that needs to be apportioned or split out and on-charged or recharged to one or more other zero files. Now, the classic case is an expense rule. I won't go over the details of that because that is kind of the base functionality. We talked to that in our sales demos. But something within expenses that not everybody is using or aware of is the cost plus functionality. So if I go down to a rule that I've already got, for example, I can actually change that rule, which I don't need to at this point, is move this from an at cost to a cost plus rule. And when you make something cost plus, that's saying I want to not just take this expense and move it to another entity. I actually want to make some money off of that. So when you're dealing with transfer pricing and you have to have these arm's length agreements and you actually have to trade within a group as though you were separate entities, cost plus is going to be a big game changer for you. So if I just go over to add new, just for the sake of showing you, we've got cost plus there. You can then choose your markup. So I could say I want 10% above the cost. And then you can either choose to, well, I suppose you can choose where that revenue should go. So I could say I want that, the revenue that we're making from this recharge to go to sales. And then you've got the same functionality around selecting which transactions you want it to pick up and where or how those costs need to be split. So the key thing I just want to call out there is cost plus if you're not already aware of that. Revenue rules are relatively new. So if you haven't had a look at those yet, if you're recharging revenues, this is going to be core or key for you. The same logic to the rule system applies with some slight changes. Revenue is going to be recharged based on a percentage of revenue. So further down, we set that percentage. The other thing to think about here is, what do you want Mayday to do with the expense? So do you want us to net it off against the relevant revenue account and actually leave revenue at nil? So we're saying, look, there's $10,000 in revenue. We want to push that to a different entity. And I want that account to be zeroed out. Or do I want an equal but opposite expense to be raised? So you can choose here to post it as an expense or to net it off. And then down below here is where you set the percentage. So, I can have multiple entities in here. I could say I want this to go to Mayday Australasia and Mayday Inc. And I want 50% of the revenue there and 50% of the revenue there. Great, easy. Fill in the account codes and the relevant tracking categories, and you're off and running. I'll get to this in a minute. We'll talk about this functionality, which is also relatively new. We've then got balance sheet rules. So balance sheet rules are in particular groups. There are items that are being stored on the balance sheet. Sometimes this is because we know these are going to be recharged, and so we don't want them sitting on the P&L during the month, because obviously that could just impact, reporting or the way we're looking at the P&L. So we want to just keep them out of there. So if you're currently storing those expenses on your balance sheet, you can set up a balance sheet rule that can then on-charge that to another entity's or multiple entities P&L. We've also recently released balance sheet to balance sheet functionality. So if you've got the use case that I've seen there is a development company, property development, where they actually have, asset costs or development costs stored on the balance sheet, which is correct, but they want to on-charge those and move those into a different entity. So they needed a balance sheet to balance sheet rule, which you can also set up inside of Mayday now too. But once again, the logic of the rule system remains the same, so it's nice and easy. The final rule, which is another one of our recent additions to Recharger, is what we call a Mayday rule. This is different to the other three, in the sense that the other three rules are based on transactions that exist in Xero already. We're picking those up and we're then doing the recharge in accordance with your rule. A Mayday rule is actually a transaction that doesn't necessarily or isn't necessarily in Xero yet. The classic case is the monthly management fee, where at the end of the month, we figure out what that management fee is going to be. It doesn't exist in Xero yet. We figure out what the fee is, we record we post the revenue in one side, then we have to go into the individual entities to post the expenses. We figured why not allow us to do that for you automatically. So you can set up a new rule in here. I've already got one ready to go. And effectively you determine how much is the charge. So for Mayday HQ, we're saying it's £5,000. Obviously it would just be in the base currency of the entity. Where do you want that charge to go inside of that entity? So I'd like that to go to other revenue. And then how would you like that to be split and charged within the other entities in the group? So I would like it to be split as the amount per apportionment unit. So to avoid confusing everybody, it's basically saying £5,000 is the charge, and I want that to go to each of these entities, 5,000, 5,000, or if I change that to 10,000, that's going to go to each entity. Or I can say 10,000 is the total, and I'd like that split within the group. So as total and split by percentage. So you can see there, 5,000 and 5,000 equals 10,000. So it's just up to you. And obviously, if I want 2/3 of that to go to one entity and 1/3 to go to another, you can play around with the apportionment units as needed. I could say 8 and 2, and now we're getting 80% in one, 20% in the other. You can go as deep as you need to get those splits how you need them to be. And obviously on that side, we're talking about expenses. So we've got the revenue coming into the head entity, and we've got the expenses going into the individual entities. So that is a Mayday rule. We've seen that used in a variety of different ways. So moving beyond just the simple breakdown of the rules here, I want to get into apportionments in a little bit more detail. So I think most people who are using Recharger are using apportionments to some degree, some more than others. So I guess as a high level, the apportionment section was really designed for situations where you might have a lot of rules that are being split the same way. It could be split based on headcount, based on floor space, based on sales turnover, based on anything else. But if you've got a lot of different rules, a lot of different transactions that you're picking up, you're building these rules out, but you know that when the headcount changes, I'm going to have to manually update all of those rules. So we wanted to prevent you from having to do that. So we created apportionments, and apportionments exist so that you can set up kind of a high level apportionment that can then be applied to multiple rules. So as you can see here at the group level, I've got, these is obviously demo data, but I've got commercial headcount. So how many of our commercial team are in each of these entities, because we've got some costs that we split based on the commercial team. What about floor space? Because we've got rent and those kinds of expenses that we actually split based on physical floor space of the location or the office space that they take up. We've got headcount, which is our total headcount across the team. Marketing split, maybe we have, marketing expenses and we know we split those based on something. We've got sales headcount, we've got costs to do with our sales team as an example, and turnover split too. It's quite a common one where we're saying at the end of the month, what's our revenue? We have some certain costs that we're going to split based on that. So apportionments you can set up here. What you need to keep in mind is if you are running recharge calculations for a given month, so let me say I run my recharges for the month of February. When I run that and I lock that in and mark that as final, we store, alongside the rules, we store the rules and the apportionments at that point in time against that running or against that calculation, so that in future you can change these, but that history is maintained against that calculation. So you don't have to worry if I have to go back 3 months and I have to update a recharge. Well, I want to update it, but I don't want it to pick up today's headcount. I want it to pick up the headcount that was there 3 months ago because that's the correct headcount. So don't worry, we handle that all for you. You can keep updating this as you see fit each month, but we will store historically the apportionment methods that you've used in previous recharge calculations. Now, if I jump into a rule here, just to very quickly show you how this is working. So when you're in any of your rules, there's going to be an option here. How would you like to apportion this? And effectively, you can just jump between those different apportionment methods. So you can see here, sales headcount is 8 units going to Mayday Inc., 29 units going to Mayday HQ. I can't edit that because it's a fixed apportionment, but I can still choose where I want those expenses to be recharged into. Of course, though, I can just create a custom apportionment and that will let me start from scratch on this rule. So it's up to you. You might not need an apportionment method. You might just want custom, but the option is yours. To then bring in a new element, which is once again a relatively new feature. And this is, so we're now changing tack, not completely, but a little bit, to what we're calling intra-entity recharges or intra-entity reallocations. So an intra-entity reallocation is very similar to a recharge. In essence, we're taking a transaction that's in Xero and we're moving it. It's just that we're moving it within the same Xero file in this case. So we've got a lot of customers who have, let's say it's a mining organization. They have one Xero file, but they have many locations. They know that there are certain costs that come in that then need to be split based on the tracking categories. So they have a tracking category for location, whole bunch of locations, and they know 8% of these costs go to that location, 10% go there, 15% go here, 16% go there. And so previously it was a manual process. Every time an invoice came in, manually update the invoice, manually set the tracking categories, do the calculations yourself. So very time-consuming, painful process. With intra-entity recharges or reallocations, you can do that right from within Mayday. So I can come in here and I can say Mayday HQ is the entity. I don't want it to leave Mayday HQ. I actually want this to stay within Mayday HQ. I just want to reallocate it. So I can choose Mayday HQ here. And you'll notice that it then kind of pulls down this little arrow, which is basically saying, okay, if these are the expenses you want me to reallocate, there's 100% of those expenses that we want reallocated. Of that 100%, how would you like it split? So I can say I'd like it split 3 ways, 4 ways, 2 ways, whatever I need. And I can change these apportionment units to, how I need. So I can make sure that the split is exactly how I need it. Then, because we're talking about it staying within the same entity, I can actually say I can keep information from the original transaction. So if I know the original transaction has gone to the right account code, I can leave that as it is. Or if I want to split it out, I can split it out. So you've got that option. You've then got tracking category 1. Do you want to set a new tracking category or is it the same? And then tracking category 2. So in this case, I actually want to split that between my departments. I know that that's how I want it split. Great. Set the rule up and you're off and running. That just will post as a journal so that when you run your calculations over here, we'll pick up any transactions that meet that criteria, create the journal for you, and then apply that so that you don't have to manually do that for every transaction. So that's kind of a cool new use case, intra-entity functionality. So keep that in mind for any of your single entity situations. And if you're an accountant or a virtual CFO or something like that, if you've got single entity clients, who are dealing with that, it can be a massive time saver. I won't go into detail on this, but you can also do a combination recharge, which can be a little bit of inter-entity, which might mean I want to split this amongst multiple entities, but then within one of those, I need to split. So I could also add down here another entity and say, Mayday Australasia should get 50% of these costs, and that's not going to be split. That's just going to go there. But the other 50% will stay within Mayday HQ, and it will be split out. Or, I could put that to another entity. It's all quite flexible. So basically, you're getting to a point now where you can do nearly anything with a recharge rule. Now, before I move on from Recharger, because it is quite a powerful tool and there is a lot of functionality, and the whole point of this session is to go deep on some of the more advanced capabilities within Mayday. Something that some people are using to great effect, but others haven't quite realized maybe exists, is within sources here. Not only can you connect a Xero file, but you can also connect a Google Sheet. Now, the Google Sheet is something that we create on your behalf because we have a template that we basically use. And that Google Sheet looks a little bit something like this. You can use it for basically anything. The most common scenario here is payroll, where we have a single payroll line item in Xero, which doesn't help us much when it comes to splitting that cost out among entities. So I can download my payroll data, put that in here, and apply the relevant information as though this was split out in Xero. So let me act as though I'm doing the split in Xero, but rather than manually click through an invoice and split it out line by line by line over hundreds, just paste it into a spreadsheet here. We make it easy for you. Set the relevant department that individual is working in, or the region, or what the account code you want it to be split out to, and then we can use that information and run rules over the top. So once your spreadsheet's up to date, we can come in here and we can say, look, I've got a new rule. It's going to be at cost. But what we're doing here is we're actually changing. We're trying to recharge specific expenses, but we're not recharging from Xero. We're recharging from the sheet. The recharge will still post in Xero, obviously, on both sides, but we're just using the sheet as the source data for understanding how we want to recharge it. And that just means I can look for, I want it to be anything that's in, account 477. I think that's going to be in here. Great. Salaries. And I'm looking for anything that has the department, engineering. Great. Cool. So I've got that. So it's going to pick up all of the transactions that are in those ones for the month of, whatever month I'm in. And it's going to then recharge that. I would like that split out, across a couple of entities here, Mayday Inc. and Mayday Australasia. And this is going to be, direct costs or wages. What do we have in here? Salaries and wages. Great. Wages. Great. Department is going to be, I don't have an engineering one, but we'll just go software there. So great. Now I've got that rule, payroll for software developers. Fantastic. And save the rule, and I'm done. That's now going to pick up any transactions that go through that spreadsheet. Okay. So that's a really massive time saver for anyone doing payroll and wanting to recharge payroll in bulk too. Cool. I might just take a breath, but and kind of summarize there what we've been through. So for Recharger, keep in mind that we've got expense rules for expense account codes where you want to pick up an expense and recharge it. Revenue rules for the same, but on revenue account codes where we're recharging a percentage of revenue. We've got balance sheet rules. It can go from balance sheet to a P&L or balance sheet to balance sheet. And then you've got Mayday rules for things like your management charges where the transaction doesn't exist in Xero yet. So you can let us create both sides of the transaction, post the revenue in one entity, and then split it out and post the management charges into the others. So that's all awesome. Intra-entity functionality is now in there as well if you need that. And you can use the spreadsheet too as needed. So what I'll do now is I'll jump over to Balancer. There's a few things I want to go through here. A little bit of a simpler product, so there's a less detail, less time required to go through this one. So I want to start with the matching and unmatching functionality. So when you pop into Balancer, obviously you've got your intercompany loans in here. You can spot your discrepancies, nice and easy. And then your transaction details is kind of where you can narrow that down and really identify any one-sided postings. Inside here, something just to keep in mind is there is a button called Edit Transaction Matches. You'll also find that against any of the one-sided postings. And basically, that's us saying, hey, we couldn't find a match for this, but you might know something that we don't. Maybe there's a really complicated scenario where you've got 3 transactions on one side that equal 4 transactions on the other, and we weren't able to piece that up because the dates weren't really relevant. The transactions didn't give us any reason to think they were aligned, but you know that they are. So you can hit that match button. We then take you through to the matching screen, and then from there we take you straight down. You could say, look, actually those 2 match up with that one. And group those transactions. Fantastic. It's just a process that you can go through if you want for, I suppose, for peace of mind when you're viewing this, so that you can kind of clear out any of the one-sided postings from your mind so that you can spot anything that's remaining. So we do that automatically for you, probably 90-95% of the time. But if there are complicated scenarios there where we haven't matched, you can use the fix this match or the edit transaction matches button to manually group, also ungroup transactions that we've grouped. So totally up to you. Something else on this screen that I thought worth calling out while we're here today is around foreign currency, because I know I think anyone who's dealing with multiple currencies in Xero or loans that have multiple currencies, there is some detail in this and some nuance. So firstly, I wanted to kind of call out that the FX rate that you're seeing on screen here, this is, I suppose, the FX rate that we use just to show you what the balance would convert to at that date. We're certainly not saying that would be, if you go into Xero, if this is a US entity, that's what you'll see in Xero. And if you converted that yourself using whatever rate you use, it might be different to what we're showing here. And that's fine. That's fine. That's just the rate we're using. It's coming from the European Central Bank Exchange. But if you need to change that, if you're really keen to customize those dates, or you've got another FX rate that you're using, you can come over here and actually override the exchange rate. And you can set that as a daily rate, or for the whole month, or fixed for all time. So you can kind of control how you need or where you need to update or override those exchange rates. And that way, at least at the end of the month, when you're looking at a balance and you see a discrepancy, if you know that you're using the FX rates that you want to be using, then you can trust that that discrepancy is in fact the FX adjustment that you need to post. And so then when you come to post it, you can just click that, knowing that it's using the correct rate and you're happy with that. Rather than, if you were using a rate you didn't want it to be using and it was marginally off, but over a large, over a big number, that can be a material amount. So you come in here, edit that, and then go ahead and post your adjustment. If you do any overriding of rates, just keep in mind, because we want to have that audit trail for you, that in the settings section, there's actually an exchange rates area. So you can see any of the rates that you've applied and overridden, so that you know where that's been done. Cool. So that's kind of the first part of FX, and the main thing that I wanted to show you in Balancer. One other component of Balancer, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand initially, is the lender-borrower dynamic. So within Mayday, we have this concept of a lender and a borrower. By default, the lender is going to be the one in debit and the borrower going to be the one in credit, because that's the vast majority of situations. But we appreciate that sometimes you've got an entity that is always lending. The balance might just have fallen the other way for a period of time, but you still want it to be the lender. So you can actually go up to settings here and say, hey, this entity is always going to be a lender. And that way we can flip the loans to show the lender on the left and the borrower on the right. And that way, I suppose, why does this matter? Well, viewing it is one reason, but it's also how we know where to post interest, or which way to post interest. And it's also how we know where to post the FX adjustments too. As of today, we don't have, as I'm showing you this, you'll notice there is no way to set an individual loan. I can't say on just this loan, hey, they're the borrower, or they're the lender, and they're the lender, and they're the lender. I can't choose that one by one. I can let Mayday do it automatically based on debits and credits, or I can set it at a whole entity level. But as of very soon, as in probably by the time you see this or next week, this will be, a new feature will be live, and there's going to be the option, little pen icon over here, that will allow you to say, hey, for this particular loan, this entity is always going to be the lender. And you'll see that in a couple of different areas in the product too. So I just wanted to call that out. The other thing to note is that very soon we're also releasing AR and AP matching. So as of today, intercompany loans are balance sheet accounts where we're saying this balance sheet account and this balance sheet account should match, and we show them to you here. But we understand that in some groups, it's not so much the intercompany loans, or that there are still intercompany loans that matter, but they also want to keep on top of the accounts receivable to contact A, and the likewise on the other side, the accounts receivable to contact B should match. We want those two to match, the AR in one entity and the AP to the other, because this is how some groups are managing their intercompanies. It's effectively just as invoices and bills. So very soon you'll be able to actually set up and match AR and AP from within here, which will be great. So keep an eye on that. Now, with the last few minutes, I did want to speak to Brag, which is our third product here, which stands for Bank Reconciliation Across the Group, if you're not already using it. And the reason why I wanted to talk to Brag was because although it's fantastic for finding a payment that's in one zero bank feed that relates to a bill or invoice in another entity, I can go to the Mayday tab here, I can match that, I can go through, and then if you go through and continue, we're going to go into the other zero file, mark that bill as paid to the intercompany account, come back over here and pre-fill this screen so that you just have to click OK. And so that way, the transaction is marked as paid on the other entity side. You don't accidentally end up with double payment of the same bill. And likewise, on this side, we know that it's been updated, marked to the intercompany too. So the intercompanies are both updated, the bill's paid off, the bank's reconciled, and we're hunky-dory. But there are some more complicated scenarios here. So I wanted to call those out. One is there is no bill or invoice in the other entity yet. That's okay. Relatively easily solved. You can use the create functionality, just like you would use the create functionality normally if there was no bill or invoice to match to. You can do that in the Mayday tab and create a transaction in another entity, like a spend money. But the more advanced scenario, which is what this is all about, being a masterclass, is when you've got a situation where I'm trying to match this to multiple transactions, which you can currently do. You can match to multiple. I can tick 2 boxes and you can see over here, we can see what's been selected. I could create another bit and that would add a third one. So you can match to multiple. That's easy enough. But what about if I want to match it to something that's in this entity and something that's in another entity? That's where things get a little bit trickier. So I just wanted to kind of speak to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop open match. We'll match it to the transactions that are currently inside this entity first. So I choose those two. Then I scroll down to new transaction and I go spend money. And then once I'm in the spend money screen, I can scroll back up to the Mayday tab, look for the match that I want, go ahead and click OK, click continue. We'll reconcile that bill. But basically what's happening is we've then pre-filled this screen for you. So we've gone off into the other entity, marked that as paid. You can then save the transaction here. And then you'll see we've got all 3 bills lined up. And obviously the total is out because I haven't picked 3 bills that actually add up. But you would just go ahead and click reconcile. And all 3 of those would be marked off on this side. And the one on the other side's already been done, already marked to the intercompany account. So I hope that, I appreciate it's probably a little bit of an edge case, but as part of a masterclass, I figured I would make sure I call it out. And yeah, there's been quite a full-on session. I hope that's been valuable. I hope there's been some insights in there that, or some features and functionality that you weren't aware of before. And obviously, I'm happy to hang around for any questions if anyone has any. I'll send an email out as well to everybody who registered for this with a copy of the recording in case you want to take a closer look, share it with the team, or come back to me separately with other questions. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we can do this again for you soon. Cheers.